The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
The South Holland series is sponsored by Gainsborough Cycles, 01427 617 752. For all your cycling needs, this is your one-stop shop located at 20 Ropery Road, Gainsborough, or online at gainsboroughcycles.com. There's a link in the description. Gainsborough Cycles, ask for Trevor Halstead. Welcome back to South Holland again, people. Once again, we are in the Fens, and we're going to be doing a lot of driving around this particular place, just like we did in the last episode in Quadring. Now, in this particular parish, there's one bit where you're driving for ages and ages, and you haven't really gone anywhere. It's a long linear thing called Risegate, and you'll find it in the parish of Gosberton. Gosberton, Gosbert's town. This weekend we're continuing the latest run in South Holland, working our way towards Spalding. Last time out we were in Quadring, and we left off at the point where the parish boundary between that and this runs through the hamlet of Westthorpe. Having crossed that line, we find ourselves in Gosberton, located 6 miles north of Spalding and 9 miles away from Holbeach. Like Quadring, this one contains several small hamlets as well as a main village. The parish includes Gosberton, Clough and Risegate, which is almost a secondary village laid out along a waterway. The place name Gosberton is first mentioned in the Domesday Book, where it appears as Gosbert Church and Gozeberda Churcher. These early names literally mean Gosbert's Church. Since then it's been contracted somewhat, and the addition of Tun has changed its meaning to Gosbert's town. There is most definitely still a church here though, in fact there are two. It's not short of other landmarks either. For a start, there are two schools, one a primary, the other a special school called Gosberton House Academy. There's also a Baptist church built in 1666 which is still in use. Splitting Gosberton from Risegate is the Peterborough to Lincoln railway line, where there was once a station. Pubs within the parish include the Black Horse Inn, the Duke of York and the Five Bells Inn at Risegate, and the Bell Inn in Gosberton village. The main occupation out here is of course farming. Some residents do, however, commute to the larger towns of Spalding and Boston as well. It's a big one this, so we better get cracking. Kicking off the parish of Gosberton, we have an area to the west of the main village out in the Fens. This is the conjoined settlement of Gosberton Clough and Gosberton Risegate, which runs for almost 2 miles in a linear fashion along an almost dead straight waterway, a drain called Risegate O. The western portion of the settlement is Gosberton Clough, while to the east, that's Risegate. The boundary between the two can be a little hard to define, especially if you're not a local, but in broad terms, you have to look at the road names. The main road through the settlement is the B1397, where it's named Clough Road, that's Gosberton Clough. Where it's named Risegate Road, that's Gosberton Risegate. The separation between them is a bridge over Risegate O at the junction with Chesbowl Lane running north and Beach Lane running south. Risegate O starts 2 miles away to the west at South 40-foot Drain, then flows through the village and reaches the River Welland at the Risegate Outfall Sluice within Alderkirk Marsh, some 7 miles to the east. Mirroring the B1397 on the other side of Risegate O is Siltside, a road that runs almost in parallel. This setup gives the place a very peculiar feel. It's almost all centred on the drain, and every landmark is on its banks. Let's have a look at some of them. Let me tell you folks, it's a long old trek through Gosberton, Clough and Risegate. It's 2 miles from end to end, and you certainly know about it when you're in the car. First landmark is this here, the Centenary Methodist Church in Gosberton Clough. Let's get going. Beginning with the ones in Gosberton Clough, here we have the local Methodist Church. Located on Beck Bank, which runs north from Risegate, this was built in 1935. Prior to this, there had been both primitive and Wesleyan Methodist chapels in the settlement. This chapel was built shortly after the unification of the Methodist churches in 1931. It stands on an acre of land which has been used for outdoor activities like picnics in the past. The building is no longer in use for regular services. It closed in September last year, and its future is a little uncertain now. At its western end is a former Sunday school room. It also has a flat-roofed extension, latterly occupied by a modern kitchen and disabled toilet facilities. Let's turn now onto the B1397. While we're driving, it's worth noting some of the businesses that can be found in Gosberton Clough. It has a small business park with both tyre sales and timber sales outlets. There's also a transport company and a warehousing facility too. A further transport company for minibuses, taxis and light haulage is at the west of the village, and on Beck Bank to the south is Bank House, a Grade 2 listed care home. Next, it's a school. Named Gosberton Clough and Risegate County Primary School, it's a shared facility used by both of the hamlets. The school was built in 1878 and was designed to cater for some 200 children. Now, as far as churches go here in Gosberton, there are two. There's one in the main village, which has got an interesting story involving some secret tunnels. It'll be good when we get to it. But this one here, St Gilbert and St Hugh, in Gosberton Clough and Risegate, is potentially one of the most unusual churches you'll ever find in the country. Let's discover why. This is the impressive church of St Gilbert and St Hugh. Dating from 1902, it was built by William Bucknell and Ninian Comper and was given a Grade 2 listing in 1988. It was described at the time as a chapel of ease. The design of the church is quite extraordinary and possibly unique. It was undoubtedly influenced by the arts and crafts movement. Comper was, of course, one of the last of the great Gothic Revival architects, designing both churches and stained glass windows. This church includes one of his famous strawberries. To explain, his father, who was a priest, died suddenly whilst giving strawberries to poor children in Cuthie Park in Aberdeen. From that point onwards, the strawberry became his signature. Composition-wise, this church has a nave, a bellcote, a chancel, a vestry and a south porch. A restoration of the church was begun in 2001. In the church are 4 gilded wooden angels, carved and donated by Belgian refugees during World War I. Their restoration by Will Kirk was shown on the BBC TV programme The Repair Shop in April 2020. Let's not forget the church hall here too, by the way. Even though it serves the same purpose as any other church hall, it shouldn't be forgotten. It sits together with the church on the same plot of land. In the car again, now we're going to cross Risegate and get ourselves back onto Siltside. In doing so, we'll also make the jump from Gosberton Clough to Gosberton Risegate, and this has a completely different set of landmarks waiting for us. Amenities, facilities and businesses in Risegate include a truck sales and service centre, a portable toilet company, a haulage company depot, a memorial masonry contractor, a wrought ironwork company and a farm at Cressy Hall. It also has pubs. And on that note, the next stop is the Five Bells. This building was the Five Bells, clearly no longer a pub these days. When it was in business, its landlord was a potato dealer. It was one of several pubs established along Risegate in the 19th century. On that note, there's a second one a short drive away, and it's called the Black Horse. At present, the Black Horse isn't trading either. It was forced to close last year due to the ill health of its owners, who still live here, as per the signs in its window. It was a well-loved pub in the local area. Built in the 19th century, it was a popular destination for diners and local residents alike. It was very much a food-led pub that served many traditional pub classics. It still has its large garden area, a car park, and a commercial kitchen. Right next to the Black Horse is the Marjorum Hall Community Centre, effectively the village hall. That's not what it's always been though. This was a former free school, a single-storey red brick building in an L-shaped plan. White's 1856 trade directory states that the free school was founded in 1681 by Robert Marjorum, but had fallen into decay and was due to be rebuilt. The 1872 directory also states that the school was yet to be rebuilt. It was finally completed 4 years later, in 1876. It's unclear when the school was closed, but the hall still remembers Robert Marjorum by way of its name. Okay, so from this point onwards, we're going to head now into Gosberton village. I'm going to stay on Siltside. However, there are a couple of landmarks on the other road where we began, where the church was and the school was. But yeah, I'm going to stay on Siltside because this is the one that takes me into the village. So for the rest of this sort of run through Risegate, I'm just going to drive it and describe to you what's on the other side of the road. There is also something else on this side, the War Memorial. We'll catch that. But otherwise, I'll see you in the main village. On the other side of Risegate, there are two things we need to mention. One's the site of a former pub, the other is a former chapel. The latter was Gosberton Risegate Methodist Church, built in 1886 to replace an earlier Wesleyan chapel dating from 1826. That building is now a dwelling. The site of the pub is just a stone's throw away from it. Named the Duke of York, it was another popular local that was well known for its value for money food and beer. The pub was demolished a few years ago, and the site is currently being redeveloped into 8 new houses. The Duke of York had been here since at least 1881 and supported local community life through charities, sports teams and other social events. Unfortunately, it was a casualty of the pandemic and was demolished due to the high cost of repairs and the impact of the global virus. Driving to the end of Siltside now, we pass by an unlisted 12-foot-high war memorial, a Celtic cross made of Scottish marble dedicated to the dead of the First and Second World Wars. It stands at the point where Siltside becomes Windmill Lane and heads north towards Westhorpe. To get into the main Gosberton village from here, we have to pass over the Peterborough to Lincoln railway line. It was the site of the former Gosberton railway station, which opened in 1882 and closed in 1961. Today, its site is used for light industry and storage. To begin proceedings in Gosberton itself, we have to drive around the northernmost part of the village for no other reason than to just make sure it's covered. You see, Gosberton is a very awkwardly shaped village. The walking route around it was incredibly hard to plan, and lots of areas were just too awkwardly sited to include. This is one of them. Nonetheless, I am nothing if not thorough, so here you go, proof positive that I do think about every bit of every village, even if I don't show it all. Okay, here we are then in Gosberton village. It seemed to take me ages to do Clough and Risegate, but we are through them both, which is a good thing. We are here in the main village, and this is going to be quite an interesting little walk, to be honest with you, because even though this isn't the biggest village in the world, there are loads of things to talk about with this particular place. So we better get cracking, and we're starting here with the cemetery. Let's go. We begin our walk at Gosberton Cemetery, located on Wargate Way. It's a cemetery that's frankly impossible to miss, given this gorgeous mortuary chapel plonked right in the middle of it. The chapel, and indeed the rest of the cemetery, dates from 1888, the year in which this all opened. At 2 acres size-wise, it was created because the churchyard at the time was full. Gosberton Parish Council manages the cemetery and keeps its records. Let's head north now for a short distance towards that church and towards a school, both sited in the same area. This is Gosberton House, which is a care home, but part of it is also a school. This is not, though, your average primary or secondary. Gosberton House was originally a country house and the former home of the Welby Everard family. It stands within very pleasant grounds which were purchased along with the house by Holland County Council in 1952. Today, part of it is the Gosberton House Academy, a special school designed to cater for children on the autism spectrum. It opened in 1953, initially as a day school. School dinners at that time were cooked at Donington's secondary school and brought to Gosberton House in containers by van every single day. On the completion of the construction of the classroom block in 1955, full-time boarding for 20 boys and 20 girls was introduced, bringing the total number of pupils on roll to 80. Most of the children came from within the area covered by the old Holland County Council, primarily Boston and Spalding. In 1984 it once again became a day school, as boarding provision was transferred to a new accommodation block at Tearoom House in Spalding itself. In order to develop facilities to establish an integrated unit for children with an autism spectrum disorder, 2 new classrooms were built during 1994 and 1995. By 2005, a sensory garden and a creative area were opened too. In 2006, the Rainbow Room was opened for youngsters with complex needs. That's a specialist base for a maximum of 5 children who need a very highly structured and individualised teaching and learning programme. To the church next. This is dedicated to St Peter and St Paul. There's been a church here for at least 1,000 years. The remains of an earlier Norman building are visible via specially made trapdoors in the floor of this one. This one has some rather unusual and quirky facts. For a start, the oldest bell here predates the Civil War. It's believed that many of the plain windows in the church were replacements for those smashed by Cromwell's army or supporters during it. His army also removed all the brass detail from memorials in the floor to melt down and use for guns and cannons. From the tower, it's possible to see the hills beyond Stamford and also the Lincolnshire wolds in the very far distance. It has one of the loftiest spires in the Fens, rising to a height of 176 feet from the ground to the tip. The church is reputed to be connected by secret tunnels to at least 2 old homes. Evidence of one has been found, but the other remains undiscovered. Now there's a mission for somebody to take on. The perpendicular style of architecture was invented by William of Wykeham, a famous 15th century vicar, and 2 of the windows of this very church may well be his earliest work. Well, I'll tell you something, this place is cavernous. It's massive in here, and it's also warm too. It's a very, very cold day out on the Fens today, so it's good just to be in here for a short while and out of that cold wind chill. Would you look at this amazing church? This is fantastic. And you know what, if it does have some tunnels underneath it, I would not be surprised. You do tend to find that big buildings like this have something, don't they, of a secret passageway of some description. It's just how they were built, I suppose. That noise you can hear in the background, by the way, is the heaters. They are on full blast today, and that's a good thing. But this amazing stained glass here on the right hand side, isn't that fantastic? There's generally speaking not much stained glass in here, because most of the windows are like this one here, just, you know, plain without any glass in them at all. Any stained glass, I should say. That's why it's so light and airy in here. But this is a beautiful church. Now when I walked in here, I noticed there's an effigy on the right hand side over here. I haven't looked at it yet, so I don't know who it's of. We're going to find out though. Here it is. Now, who might that be, do you think? Oh, there's two of them. There's two of them. We've got a knight there, and obviously his lady next to him. I wonder who they are. There's no information board to tell us who they are, unless... no, it's not that. Wilfred Higgins. No, died in 1972. No, these guys are definitely older than that. Beautiful though. Love effigies like that, and love buildings like this too. The church hall is nearby, and here's that before we move on again. White's Directory of Lincolnshire lists 4 inns and taverns in Gosberton village. One of them was the Bell Inn, and that's next. This one is Grade 2 listed and was built in the 19th century. Legend has it that back in the 1980s, the Bell Inn had an absolutely cracking darts team. I wonder if any of its members ever made it onto Bullseye. The team was, according to an old photo I sourced, made up of John Bemrose, Morris and Keith Quincy, Ron Tilley, Mervyn Stanley, Harold Blundy, Roy Mason, Frank Greetham, Malcolm Short and David Leake. Shops-wise, Gosberton has a couple. Here's one of them as we start to make our way towards the southern reaches of the village. This is the Co-op, but I wouldn't be featuring this if it didn't have some sort of backstory, now would I? It's an old chapel, and the reason for its existence goes back to 1852. In that year, reformers had control of the Wesleyan chapel in Gosberton, but were deprived of this soon after, when, by a vote, they lost majority management of their building. They met in a house near the Five Bells Inn until acquiring their own place of worship. Eventually, in 1854, a small square building was erected on Church Street. For a short time it was known as the Wesleyan Reformed Chapel and then the Free Methodist Chapel, becoming a member of the Spalding United Methodist Free Circuit later. In 1907 a new chapel was opened on the High Street to replace it, and that's what you're looking at right now. It was designed and constructed by a W. Jepson of Spalding at a cost of £670. It had seating for 200 people and a schoolroom for 140 children, with a sliding partition separating the two main rooms. The chapel was the first ever to be new built in South Lincolnshire with the UMC designation. It remained in the Spalding circuits pre and post-Union. Its members eventually joined forces with the ex-Wesleyans in 1952, selling the chapel for £300 to a local electrical firm in 1955. For a number of years now, it served the village as the Co-op food store. Okay, you might just have caught there behind the old chapel, the current Methodist chapel, or the top of it. That's on a different street though, we'll catch that towards the end. We're going to continue down this main road next, where we come to Gosberton Public Hall. That's this building here. Let's check it out. Kelly's Directory of Lincolnshire in 1919 states that Gosberton Public Hall was built in 1872 on a site given by Earl Brownlow. It was designed to seat about 350 people. I wonder what the modern capacity is. In any event, it's still going in the same way as it was 150 years ago. On the next junction is the War Memorial, commemorating the dead of World War I and II. The memorial is a large cross made of Scottish granite and a Celtic cross-style memorial that's made of a Scottish marble, not unlike the one at Risegate. Like the public hall, this too has a link to Earl Brownlow. It was he who unveiled the monument on May the 23rd, 1920. It was designed by Sir Walter Tapper. Now we've got another public building to see here. We don't normally feature these on the channel. This behind me here is a youth club. There's a reason for it though. Let's find out why. Gosberton Youth Centre was established in 1977. It's located within a former national school building on the High Street. For a time it sat unused and empty, but in 2023 it was reopened and it's still going strong 2 years later. The reopening was made possible by a grant and lots of help from some volunteers. As a school, the 1856 Trade Directory states it was erected in that year and had capacity for 200 children, as well as a house for the teachers. It's assumed that this building and the former infant school together formed a foundation. Now at the southernmost point of this walk, we're outside the Baptist Church. This was founded in 1666, a year better known for other things, like of course the Great Fire of London for example. Mind you, here in Gosberton the founding of this chapel was a pretty big deal. The restoration of the monarchy had led to an official crackdown by Charles II on the nonconformist or separatist churches which had been developing throughout the 17th century. Thomas Grantham, a Lincolnshire farmer and tailor, played a big part in encouraging Baptists in this area, and it was either he or one of his friends that launched this church here in Gosberton. Early Baptists were neither protected by the law nor welcomed in society. Described at the time as knavish, juggling, impudent and fanatic fellows, they complained in a petition to the king that they'd been much abused and threatened to be hanged or stoned. They were taken as evildoers and often imprisoned. In 1714, Parliament passed the Schism Act, which would have enforced discrimination against Baptists. However, Queen Anne never signed the act, dying the same day it was due to become law, and therefore it never did. Under George I, Britain became an increasingly tolerant nation. The present building was used for 200 years until in 1866 a new chapel was built to celebrate the church's bicentenary. The original meeting house was then used as a hall for the Sunday school, but by the beginning of the 1980s it was disused, unsafe and likely to be demolished. Reverend Tom Gillies, the new minister, raised funds to restore this piece of Lincolnshire history. The work took place in 1984 and 85, with the porch extension finally completed in 1989. In due course, it was the Victorian chapel that had to be demolished, having suffered from dry rot and storm damage, and the original meeting house became once more the home of Gosberton Baptist Church. There's another row of shops down here. It's not all about the co-op in Gosberton, you know. There's a Premier store, a hair salon and a takeaway too. At this point, we have to turn back north to catch the remaining few landmarks, and next we have another school to see. Earlier we saw the youth club and learned of its educational past. When it was a school, it would have worked in tandem, or so it's believed, with the old infant school building here at Gosberton Academy. Of course today, given the youth centre is exactly that, all of Gosberton's children come here to school. It's since been greatly added to. The old infant building still exists though. It's marked on the 1905 OS map as such, and the 1.5-storey red brick building with a couple of modern extensions added to the northwest is still standing and functioning today as it always has. Okay, we've turned around, we've come past the school, and now we've got a playing field. There's no point going onto this playing field though, because there's no way actually across it. This here is, I believe, the only entrance to it. So we've got to go around it. We're heading now towards our last couple of streets. We've still got a chapel to see, there's a Tearooms, and there might be a few other bits and bobs. I can't really remember. I'm very windswept at the moment, and you can probably tell it's difficult for me to speak, because it's so cold! Now we're on Salem Street, and next to pass is another Methodist chapel. Blimey, nonconformism really was a hot thing down here, wasn't it? When Methodist preaching commenced in the village, the first chapel, built by the Wesleyans, was opened in 1834 and seated 170 people. It's not known whether this was on the site of the present chapel in Salem Street or somewhere else in the village, but whatever the case, that one was replaced by this in 1878. Salem Street Chapel acquired its organ, built by Connacher, from the Crescent Chapel in Spalding upon its closure in 1955. In 2003, there was a major remodelling and refurbishment here. Excellent kitchen and toilet facilities were installed, the pews were removed and replaced by chairs, and the premises were carpeted and redecorated. And that's the way it's stayed ever since. Now, as we know, it might be a cliche, but the British Empire was built on tea, and residents of Gosberton know that as well as the next man in the street. After driving and walking around the parish, it's fitting that the last port of call here should be the excellent Victoria House Tearooms on the corner of Wargate Way. Victoria House Tearooms started life as a bakery, and since its humble beginnings in the early 18th century, it's been a general store, a haberdashery, an antique shop, and at one time it even sold motorbikes. Sapphira and Paul Waterson bought Victoria House in 2017 as a residential property, but always thought it was better suited to the commercial. Thus, the idea of starting a tea room came about. Their daughter Jade was the perfect ingredient in their plan, given her already successful business making celebration cakes, but her ambition was to run a tea room of her own. So for the last 8 years, the Victoria House Tea Room has been a Gosberton landmark, and after all that wandering around, learning all sorts of things, it's the best place to call it a day. Except that's not quite it for this South Holland run just yet. I had one more to cover, so it was a walk back to the car and then a drive off southwards again. Join me tomorrow as we take on a parish that has another waterway, one that becomes tidal at a sluice gate near the Wash. just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.